Thank you for attending another one of AlphaStaff's monthly webinars. Today's topic is managing different generations in the workplace. A little about the presenter today, which is myself, Jamshed Khan. Some of you may have heard me on a previous webinar. I am an HR account manager with AlphaStaff, and I've been in the field for about 18 plus years. I've done training on various topics and industries. And fun fact about me, some of you may have heard this before, is that I've actually seen Sir Paul McCartney perform live, which was pretty cool. So let's get started with today's topic, generational diversity. Today we're going to talk about generational diversity, recognizing and understanding differences among the different generations in the workplace can help you become better supervisors for your employees. Generational diversity can have an impact on the way employees perform, the way they perceive you and the organization, and the way they interact with one another. Although generational differences are only one way the workforce is diverse, and although generation is only one factor affecting employees' attitudes and behaviors, you need to understand the influences, experiences, and concerns that shape your employees so that you can work well with the employees of all ages and encourage them to perform at their best. The main objective of this session is to help you better understand generational diversity so that you can supervise all your employees more effectively. By the time the session is over, you should be able to define generational diversity, identify the different generations in the workforce, understand differences among the generations that can affect the workplace, appreciate the impact of generational diversity in communication, feedback, teamwork, motivation, training and development, and also use the knowledge of generational diversity to improve supervision of an employee. The workplace has always been a diverse place where different people of different ages, backgrounds, and abilities have come together to work and make things, provide services, and help the economy grow. The workforce is diverse in many ways. It includes different race, gender, cultural, religious backgrounds, educational, economic backgrounds, age, and ability. Generation diversity focuses on differences among employees based on the generation in which a person grew up. A generation has been defined as a period of roughly 20 years. So for example, all people born between 1960 and 1980 would be of the same generation. There are 4 generations in today's workforce. Maybe some of you are able to identify them, but we'll discuss that further. The 4 generations in today's workforce have been called different things, and the exact dates of the generation may vary from one another. However, the names and dates you see on the screen will help us identify the different groups and their approximate ages, which is all we really need to be concerned about. So you have the matures, also known as traditionalists. They're born before 1945. There are a few of them left in the workforce, and the numbers are decreasing annually. But there's still some people who will work full or part-time, or they'll come back to work part-time or as temps after retiring. So you need to be aware of this group and the generational issues associated with them. The largest generation group in this in the workplace today is the baby boomers. They're born after World War II and on into the early 1960s. The next largest group is the Generation Xers, born in the mid-1960s and to 1980. And finally, the final group is the millennials, also known as Generation Y. These workers were born between 1980s and 1990s. Before we proceed, it's important to give a word of caution concerning generation diversity. Generation is only one factor affecting individual. Other factors, such as family background and personal experiences, the interests, aspirations, abilities, and personality traits, may be more important. Also, the line between one generation and the next is not a clear one. Generations are approximations. So people born at the end of one generation may have more in common with the next generation than their own. So be careful to avoid stereotyping or pigeonholing employees because of the generation. Generation diversity is only one of many factors you need to consider when supervising employees. To understand the differences among the generations of the workforce, it's important to look at the influences and experiences that have shaped their formative years. So these are people who came of age in the late 1930s and early 1940s. They were a generation that grew up on radio rather than on TV. They lived through the Depression and New Deal, or at least felt the effects of those times, and heard about the hardships of parents and grandparents, something they would never forget. These workers were also shaped by World War II, a war in which many of them had either fought or were injured. And the younger maturers may have fought in the Korean War, or most likely their fathers did. The baby boomers were the TV generation. Most of them grew up with, Howdy Doody, Gunsmoke, I Love Lucy, Little House on the Prairie. I'm sure some of you may recall other ones. I still watch I Love Lucy, and all the other shows of the 50s. They also grew up during the Cold War and lived under the threat of nuclear annihilation. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s were also a powerful influence for this generation. Some other influences were the assassination of President Kennedy, Martin Luther King. Another one comes to mind is Robert Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy. Perhaps one of the biggest influences was the Vietnam War and the protest movement that grew up as a result. This generation also experienced the effects of the Beatles and Rolling Stones, Woodstock, the sexual revolution, the drug culture in the late 60s, when many of them were coming of age in their late teens and early 20s. And of course, many of them watched the TV footage of the early astronauts circling the Earth in the spacecrafts and walking on the moon in July 1969. Boomers were also influenced by concerns about planet Earth. The new environmental movement was largely made of boomers at first. Generation Xers were the first computer generation, and by the time they got to the workplace, the technology boom was just beginning. Xers were influenced by many goings on in their formative years. For example, the women's liberation was becoming an issue in the 60s, really taking off in the 70s. Many women liberated themselves from the home and entered the workplace by big numbers, unprecedented since World War II. Watergate, the winding down of the Vietnam War, and the energy crisis, there were big issues in the 70s. In the late 70s, the big issue was the hostages in Iran, an incident that foreshadowed terrorism. And Middle East, even though it was at war in the early years of the 70s, by this time, the Carter era, there was talks of peace. The Reagan era in the 80s was a major influence on many Xers. The evil empire of the Soviet Union, covert wars in Central America, high inflation, there were also key issues of those times. And of course, the the boomers and the Woodstocks and the hippies. 80s ushered in, although that's what existed before, 80s had the yuppies and lifestyles of the rich and the famous. Uh, the millennials were the first true internet generation, and the technology boom also included cell phone and computers at school, and almost in every middle class home. The millennials were also affected by war. First, you had the Gulf War, and then the Iraq War. As young teens, millennials also watched military actions involving the US and Ethiopia, unsuccessful, and Kosovo, for example, successful. Millennials were also influenced by the dramatic fall of communism in Europe and watched as young Germans tear down the Berlin Wall. They also watched horrific scenes of terrorism on TV. You had the Oklahoma City bombing first, and then who could forget 9/11? And they saw the video of the first school shootings by any members of their own generation. This generation also grew into their teens and early 20s in a time of economic prosperity. In the 90s, the stock market was booming, like right now. And just about everybody who wanted to work could find a job. Even teens could get a job easily in the service sector. Let's take a look at the values of attitudes of different generations, beginning with the matures. So these workers were brought up either in hard times or with parental memories of hard times. For the most part, this influenced them to believe in the work ethic, loyalty, and dedication to their employer. They tended to focus on responsibility and duty and sacrifice in terms of their employment and their family. These employees have respect for authority and rules. They've been willing to pay their dues over the years. They put in the hours and do the hard work, get promotions and raises. They're never expected to see, to be given a free lunch or a free ride. They did, for the most part, however, expect to keep their job for life if they chose to. Many of the generation were solid union supporters who blended, seniority rights, the power of the union to protect their jobs, and the gratitude of their employer for loyalty, dedication, and hard work. The baby boomers, on the other hand, grew up in a time when rights were a big issue in schools, voting booths, housing, workplaces. They came to work with the notion that they had the rights as employees and employers had to respect their rights. Boomers also brought with them the optimism of the 60s and the belief that change could and should occur. And that work, as everywhere else in their lives, there were a lot of possibilities within their grasp. This generation specifically has been more interested in career and personal growth than the previous generation. They also had tended to value self-gratification and self-interest more than loyalty and dedication to the organization. However, boomers, for the most part, have been big on teamwork and participation. When they moved into positions of power in the workplace, they put an emphasis on these strategies, which have also widely adopted or been adopted and proved very successful in American enterprises of all kinds. Generation Xers tend to be independent and self-reliant, and they may consider rules as guidelines rather than absolute. They're also pragmatic rather than dogmatic. They use what works and work with what they have at hand. Xers are also growth-oriented and interested in career advancement. They're comfortable with technology and they keep up to date on workplace changes, the best practices and trends. Many of them need challenges to keep them interested and performing at their best, and they value flexibility in their jobs, amongst all things. So the millennials are still fairly new, but there's a lot of them in the workplace now, as we observe. Um, but for the most part, they appear to be confident. They're optimistic, and they're wired to technology of every kind, right? Social media, I mean, it's big with the millennials. Um, they're multitaskers and respectful of diversity is very important to them. The current concerns of the generations vary from individual to individual, of course. Some matures, for example, may be concerned about continuing to work as long as possible, either for financial reasons or because work is an important part of their lives and the prospect of retirement is not such a pleasant one. Others, on the hand, may be looking forward to and planning for retirement right now. Mine's already on the golf course or in spending more time with their grandchildren. Most matures, however, they will be concerned about healthcare benefits, at least until they qualify for Medicare. Some might be concerned about remaining active after retirement. They may be interested in coming back to work part-time or on a consulting basis. Some might be interested in earning extra money after retirement by working at least part-time or on a temporary basis. Baby boomers are also interested in healthcare benefits. Statistics show that people in their 50s and 60s begin to show and experience some health problems and disease. Boomers are generally also concerned about retirement. Some of the older ones are already retiring. Younger ones are busy saving for retirement. Many of them are empty nesters. They have finally gotten to their kids through college, and now it's time to pump up the 401k. Baby boomers may be also concerned about keeping up with workplace changes and new technologies. Some may find this more difficult than it is for the younger generations. Boomers are also often concerned about maintaining their status and position as they face more and more competition from the up and coming Generation Xers. Finally, boomers are also concerned about having more leisure time. They've been working for a long time and put in these long hours on the job over the years. Now they just want a little more time, more free time to enjoy themselves. Generation Xers are concerned about advancement and raises. They also care about achievement and recognition for their achievements. They want their job to be challenging, but they also want job security so they can continue to provide for their family. The children headed for college, there's a big mortgage possibly, and lots of other expenses. They can't afford to lose their job. So, put a lot of emphasis on those items. They also need their healthcare benefits, not so much for themselves, but for their children, and maybe for their spouses. Members of the youngest generation are most concerned about learning. They need to learn all about their jobs and their organization. They're also concerned about money, and therefore raises are likely to be a big issue with them. Millennials, I'm sorry, but they're also concerned about career opportunities, naturally being at the beginning of their careers and beginning to think about what the next steps are to get to that goal they have in mind. They're also generally concerned with recognition and feedback from supervisors. And also being respectful is very important to them. So this exercise here about a matching game matures just for review purposes. They were pre-1945. You have the baby boomers from 1945 to 1960. The Generation Xers from 1961 to 1980. And the millennials who are from 1981 to 2000s. Now it's time to ask yourself if you understand the information about generational diversity presented so far. You understand what generational diversity is all about, generational divisions in today's workplace, formative influences of each generation, attributes and attitudes of the generations. Current concerns about different generations in the workplace. It's important for you to understand all this information. It can also help you recognize differences among the generation of employees who work for you and help you supervise them more effectively. Let's talk about age discrimination and diversity. So the Age Discrimination Employment Act, it makes it illegal to discriminate anyone who's over 40 in terms of conditions of employment. This means essentially older employees have the same rights as their younger coworkers. This includes the opportunity to compete for promotions, to receive job training, to be given meaningful performance appraisals, and so on. You want to avoid marginalizing older workers or making assumptions about their aspirations and abilities. Don't, for example, assume that older workers are less flexible or less willing to learn new skills and adapt to workplace changes. So avoid even the appearance of age discrimination. Always base all employment decisions on objective job-related criteria. The advice I give to all my clients, and they may have, if you're on the line, you may have heard me saying this before, is employment decisions should be made on two factors and two factors alone: job duties and business purpose. Communication. So communication with and among employees is one of the most important issues any supervisor has to manage. Generational diversity introduces some extra considerations. For example, make sure you communicate with all your employees regularly. This means from the youngest to the oldest and everybody in between. Make an effort to understand generational differences to make sure to make your interactions with employees more effective. By recognizing and accounting for possible generational differences, you can target your communications more accurately and successfully. At the same time, use language and references you're comfortable with and that anyone can understand and relate to when communicating to all your employees. In other words, be yourself, but be aware of your own generation influences so that they don't negatively impact your interactions with employees. We've heard this many times before with communication, right? Listen carefully to ensure mutual understanding with any employee of any generation. Clarify understanding, repeat things, ask questions if you don't understand each other's words or meaning. Also, take steps to ensure that workers communicate effectively with one another, regardless of generation differences. Generational differences also have an impact on feedback. For example, views about feedback among employees from different generations can be quite different. Although all employees need positive and corrective feedback from you, regardless of their age, you should be aware of possible differences. Maturers may not rely on feedback to perform well, for example. They grew up in a time when hard work was expected and nobody gave you a pat on the back for just doing your job. So they may not need or expect as much feedback from you as the other generations. That's not to say that you don't need to give any feedback, because you do, and they need to hear it, even if it doesn't get a big rise out of them. Boomers may figure that they get the most feedback from you during performance appraisals. In between, they're not happy. They're happy to get along on their own and also praise their own performances. The Xers generally need to know how they're doing, right? They want your feedback, and they want to know all the specifics, positive, negative, everything. The millennials, they grew up hearing from their parents and teachers all the time, telling them, "Good job," every time they did something right, right? They also grew up in an age of instant communication, social media, right? So they want lots of feedback from you, and they want it right now. The cost of communication failures related to generational diversity is high. For example, failure to maintain efficient communication with and among employees of all ages and failure to provide sufficient and efficient feedback, can lead to morale and problems and conflicts. It can about increased turnover, increased recruitment, hiring, and training costs, more complaints and grievances, and more disciplinary problems. Think about the importance of positive feedback and the importance of good communication with and among employees of all generations. Another important issue associated with generational diversity is teamwork. Try to ensure that work teams reflect generational diversity to get a diversity of views and experience. Encourage team members to value one another's differences. Help them recognize the strength provided by their combined talents and perspective. Support and encourage work relationships among workers from different generations. This may involve team relationships, mentoring relationships, activities, or simply cooperation and respect between employees who have to work together every day. Finally, don't forget to do something about conflict. Conflicts, they're going to exist, and between and among generations are not unlikely, so it's best to be prepared. Teach employees conflict resolution methods. Reach out to your HR AMs to conduct a conflict resolution training or conflict management. There's healthy and unhealthy conflict, right? And that's a different topic altogether, but be ready to step in and mediate disputes if necessary. Think about your own work teams and the potential impact of generational diversity on team success. Motivation strategies for employees from different generations depend on understanding their needs, concerns, and goals. You must recognize that different employees respond to different motivators, right? What I might be motivated by fancy vacations. You might be motivated by a high salary. Someone else might be motivated by their family, the entitlement, the job title brings. One size rarely fits all, right? Generational diversity is one of those factors that can affect the motivators' views. For example, Boomers may be motivated by participation, while Xers are motivated by challenges, and millennials are motivated by instant feedback. It's also important when motivating a diverse group of employees to hold all of them to high standards of performance, right? Set the same expectations, be very consistent. When you expect everyone to perform at the highest level, not just your best employees, you're likely to motivate the best performance from all your employees. Recognize and award achievement. It should be a universal motivator for all the generations. Everyone wants and needs recognition for efforts and success. To motivate all employees, you also need to provide opportunities for all those who want them, not just for the chosen few. And to get the best performance from workers of all ages, you must emphasize performance goals and help employees reach their goals. Training and development. So training and development are other important issues related to generational diversity. Be sure to assess your group and individual training needs. For example, younger workers may need basic skills training, whereas middle-aged workers might need training to update skills or acquire new competencies. Required, some of those might be required by technological or other changes in the workplace, right? New software implementation, new, computer programs that you're using. Make sure employees of all ages get training mandated by, the government regulations, such as, the sexual harassment trainings that you have, or organizational policies. Use training techniques that appeal to all types of learners and generations. For example, Xers and millennials, right? They will take naturally to computer-based training because they're very tech savvy, whereas older workers might be more comfortable with discussions and lectures. Try to enlist the assistance of older and experienced workers as trainers and coaches. That way they'll be able to share their knowledge and insight and expertise with coworkers, and you'll be able to conduct more training more often. Finally, help all employees learn, grow, and develop. All workers need to keep growing and developing in their jobs, not just the young and the up and coming ones. So we're just going to go through this quiz. I'm just going to go through the answers, again, for review purposes. It is illegal to discriminate against employees aged 40 or older. So, going back to this one, your HRAMs will preach over and over again, and attorneys as well, documentation, right? That's how you protect yourself. That's your best defense. Sure, with other trainings that we've done in the past, other webinars you've heard, documentation is key to building a really great defense. If you're not sure how to document, if you need some templates, if you need some guidance, please reach out to your HRAMs. I'm sure they'll have plenty of resources they'll be happy to share with you. Also, just real quick, not to digress too much, on your AlphaSource admin logins, you should have access to a resource library, and there's tons of forms there that you can use as samples, or templates to help you document. So this is false. Employees of all generations, they don't all respond to the same motivators, right? We talked about it just a few minutes ago. Different generations or different employees are motivated by different things. Again, it's not true. Although they may appreciate and want that feedback, it's just not only the Generation Xers and millennials feedback, right? It's your matures and your boomers. They also probably want to hear it, although you might not get the same rise out of them. This is also false. The most effective teams are composed of employees, obviously diverse, right? The more diverse your workforce is, the more innovation and different ideas are get created, and you have more success in whatever service or products that you're delivering to your customers. Let's switch gears to supervising generational diversity. Let's take a moment to make sure you understand all the information presented in the previous slides. You understand what we, for example, said about effective or the requirement for communicating effectively with all generations, feedback that's needed of different needs, of different generations, teamwork and generational diversity, motivating employees of all generations, training and development for all employees. Knowledge of this information, it will help you. It'll help you better manage generational diversity and provide the best supervisor or supervision rather for all employees. You have to think about if you take a group of supervisors and managers, right? And you're all sitting in a room and you talk about your day, talk about your week, try to assign colors for the different days. you'll be surprised. I conduct this team activity at the beginning of some webinars and ask them to write their answers. And more often times than not, I'll get very different colors. For example, one manager had a red day, another one had a green. And sometimes the colors, they could mean the same thing, but the interpretation of it is different. For example, they think that red is really busy, right? But others might think red is, fires you got to put out. Red for some people might be motivation, while others might think about it negatively, right? Like the traffic light. Stop, take a pause, take a breather, it's out of your control kind of thing. And whenever I do this exercise, the point I try to make to them is, all the managers in the room that are present, they all view things differently in their days, right? So if their interpretation, their perspective is different, think about the different generations of different individuals in your team, they view things differently. So you might want to, to be more effective supervisors, you might want to be more flexible in your perspective and your interpretation of how they're doing it. In a different training, they talk about, different types of supervisor, right? So micromanaging, hands-off supervisor, or, the hands-on manager, a supervisor. Be flexible, especially with a diverse workforce with different generations. Try to be as diverse as possible. So we're going to conclude our training here on different generations, but I want to point out some key points that you want to remember. Generation diversity has an impact on how you supervise employees. It's only one factor, however, that affects employees' attitudes and behaviors, right? There might be different factors. You really want to avoid stereotyping employees based on generation affiliation. Again, if they're born closer to the end of those years, they might have more in common with the next generation, oftentimes. Not always, but oftentimes. And you want to take action to provide effective supervision for employees of all ages and abilities. Attend more trainings, get more feedback. Work with your HREMs on how to coach and counsel those different diverse generations that you manage. So I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I'll take this time to address any questions and see if some came up in the chat feature. This recording will be available sometime next week. Please check with your HRAMs. If you want copies of the presentation, those will be can be made available to you. You can request it directly by emailing hrsc@alphastaff.com or by calling 888-335-9545 and then electing option 8. Again, that's hrsc@alphastaff.com, and the number is 888-335-9545. As the year winds down, I can't believe it's already November, or in the middle of November. So the next one that's coming is very important for all of you as clients or managers. Please make sure that you try to attend AlphaStaff's year-end processes. This is on December 6th at 2 p.m. It's going to be conducted by a payroll and tax team. Lots of good information about W-2s and updating information reports you might need. So I strongly encourage all of you to attend.